The rolling plains of Montana stretched out endlessly before George Armstrong Custer, a vast sea of green beneath a boundless sky, with the jagged peaks of distant mountains barely punctuating the horizon. It was a landscape that held both beauty and danger, a place where the elements of nature collided with the hubris of man. And within this wild expanse, a small tributary known as Tullock's Creek meandered through the land, almost invisible amidst the grandeur of the environment, yet holding within its winding path the potential to change the course of history. To most, Tullock's Creek was just another forgotten stream, insignificant, easily bypassed, and unworthy of attention. But on this particular summer day in 1876, it became more than just a geographical feature. It became a crossroads of fate, one that George Armstrong Custer, in his blind pursuit of glory, would tragically overlook. For Custer, whose reputation had been shaped by a career of bold decisions and reckless abandon, the weight of Tullock's Creek had already been cast when Brigadier General Alfred H. Terry issued his orders. Terry, ever the cautious commander, understood the strategic importance of this seemingly minor tributary. It was a key passage, a possible route for both the Army and the Sioux forces they were hunting. By sending a scout to examine Tullock's Creek, Custer could have provided Terry with critical information, enabling him to make informed decisions and allowing for flexibility in their strategy. But history, as it often does, would soon take a different path, a path marked by disobedience, arrogance, and the fatal consequences of underestimating the enemy. The events that would lead to the disaster at Little Big Horn were set in motion long before Custer's fateful decision to bypass Tullock's Creek. In late April of 1876, Colonel John Gibbon, another key figure in the campaign, had already ordered reconnaissance missions that brought Tullock's Creek into focus. Gibbon tasked Captain Edward Ball with leading 2 companies of the 2nd Cavalry to scout the Bighorn River and return through the Tullock's Creek Valley. Gibbon, like Terry, understood the importance of gathering as much intelligence as possible, especially in a region where the movements of the Sioux and Cheyenne were unpredictable, and the terrain itself could easily become an enemy. Ball's mission, though largely uneventful, revealed the first clues about the tactical significance of Tullock's Creek. Accompanied by a group of experienced scouts, including the seasoned Tom Leforget, the Crow Indian Jack Rabbit Bull, George Herendeen, and Muggins Taylor, Ball explored the rugged terrain, gaining a sense of the land that would later become critical to the unfolding drama at Little Big Horn. The expedition was not without its challenges. On April 27th, after moving through the hayfields of Old Fort CF, Smith, Ball's column pressed deeper into the wilderness, covering miles of difficult terrain before camping near Rotten Grass Creek. From there, they crossed rolling hills, and by the evening of April 28th, they reached Lodge Grass Creek. They pushed on, passing through the Little Bighorn Valley, oblivious to the bloodshed that would soon occur on those very hills. By May, Ball and his men returned to Gibbon's command, having seen no signs of hostile forces along Tullock's Creek. Yet the absence of conflict was misleading. The valley, though quiet, was a place of opportunity, a strategic advantage that could have been seized had Custer chosen to follow his orders. But as the weeks passed, Custer's thoughts drifted further away from the measured strategies of his commanders and deeper into his own ambitions of personal glory. He could almost taste the victory that lay ahead, a victory that would cement his name in the annals of American history. But in his haste to claim this triumph, he overlooked the importance of caution, and in doing so, set in motion the events that would lead to his downfall. By mid-June, the commanders of the campaign were still uncertain about the exact movements of the Sioux and Cheyenne. Theories abounded. Some believed the Indians were camped near the Rosebud River. Others suspected they had moved up the Little Big Horn, while some even considered the possibility that they were hiding somewhere in the Tullock's Creek Valley. For Terry, the strategic importance of Tullock's Creek lay in its potential to offer a route through which his forces could maneuver, possibly even flanking the Indian village if it was indeed camped further west. The value of scouting the creek was not just about gathering intelligence, it was about creating options. And for a commander like Terry, options were the key to success in such a fluid and dangerous situation. It was with this understanding that Terry issued his orders to Custer. He was clear and specific. Custer was to thoroughly examine the upper part of Tullock's Creek and send a scout through to Colonel Gibbon's column with information about the results of this examination. It was not just a suggestion, it was a directive, a crucial part of the overall strategy designed to ensure the success of the campaign. But for Custer, the orders were little more than a formality. He believed that his instincts and experience would guide him better than any set of instructions from Terry. After all, he was George Armstrong Custer, the boy general who had led daring charges during the Civil War, who had never hesitated in the face of danger, and who had always emerged victorious. Why should this campaign be any different? As the days of June ticked by, Custer's obsession with finding the Indian village grew. Reports from his scouts suggested that they were close, that the trail was fresh, and that the moment of confrontation was near. By the morning of June 24th, Custer still seemed committed to following Terry's orders. He instructed Herendeen to prepare for a scout of Tullock's Creek, and for a brief moment, it appeared that he would adhere to the strategy laid out by his superior. But as the day progressed, something changed. Custer's focus shifted. The reports from his Crow scouts, who had returned with news of fresh tracks just a few miles ahead, inflamed his ambition. His thoughts turned away from the methodical process of scouting and gathering intelligence, and instead fixated on the promise of a glorious battle. That afternoon, Custer's column reached the gap in the hills that led to the headwaters of Tullock's Creek. Herendeen reminded him of the orders to scout the valley, but Custer, by this point, had already made up his mind. He pushed onward, following the Indian trail up the Rosebud, convinced that he was on the verge of a decisive encounter. In bypassing Tullock's Creek, Custer was not just ignoring orders, he was closing off a critical strategic option that could have given Terry and Gibbon the flexibility they needed to trap the Sioux and Cheyenne between their forces. What Custer failed to realize in his single-minded pursuit of glory was that he was not just risking his own life, but the lives of every man under his command. By moving up the Rosebud and ignoring Tullock's Creek, he was effectively isolating himself from the rest of the army, cutting off any possibility of reinforcement or support. Worse still, he was placing his column in a vulnerable position, one where the Sioux and Cheyenne, who were already aware of his movements, could easily encircle and overwhelm him. As Custer's column marched toward its fate, Major Marcus Reno faced a similar decision. Earlier in the campaign, Reno had been ordered to scout the Powder, Pumpkin, and Tongue rivers. Though his written orders did not explicitly forbid him from entering the Rosebud Valley, it was later revealed that Terry had verbally instructed him to avoid the area, fearing that his presence would alarm the Sioux too early. Reno, much like Custer, chose to ignore these warnings, pushing forward and gathering valuable intelligence. Yet, unlike Custer, Reno returned with useful information and was able to rejoin the main column without incident. The irony of Reno's actions compared to Custer's would later become a point of bitter debate among historians. Reno had disobeyed verbal orders and survived, while Custer, who had disregarded written ones, would soon march his men into a massacre. The question that would haunt military scholars for years was whether Reno's success in gathering intelligence had saved the campaign from complete disaster, or whether Custer's failure to scout Tullock's Creek had sealed their doom from the start. As night fell on June 24th, Custer's column prepared for a forced march. The reports from his scouts continued to fuel his belief that he was close to the Indian village. He ordered his men to push forward, convinced that a night attack would catch the Sioux and Cheyenne by surprise. But in his haste, he failed to consider the consequences of his actions. By choosing to bypass Tullock's Creek, Custer had lost the opportunity to provide Terry with the information he needed to make informed decisions. He had also lost the chance to secure an alternative route through which the army could have maneuvered, potentially flanking the Indian village and forcing a decisive engagement on more favorable terms. As the dawn of June 25th approached, Custer's fate was already sealed, though he did not yet know it. The decision to bypass Tullock's Creek would prove to be a fatal one, not just for Custer, but for the hundreds of men who followed him into battle. The plains of Montana, so vast and beautiful, would soon be stained with blood, the blood of soldiers who had trusted their commander to lead them to victory, and the blood of Native Americans who fought to defend their way of life. In the aftermath of the Battle of the Little Big Horn, historians, soldiers, and politicians would debate endlessly about the causes of Custer's defeat. Some would argue that he had been reckless, driven by a desire for personal glory. Others would claim that he had been outnumbered and overwhelmed by a force that no amount of preparation could have defeated. But at the heart of the tragedy lay a simple truth. Custer had disobeyed his orders. He had been given a clear directive to scout Tullock's Creek, to gather intelligence, and to provide Terry with the information he needed to make strategic decisions. By failing to do so, Custer had placed himself and his men in an untenable position, a position from which there would be no escape. The decision to bypass Tullock's Creek was more than just a tactical error. It was a reflection of Custer's character, his overconfidence, and his willingness to gamble with the lives of others in the pursuit of personal fame. In the end, it was not just Custer's disobedience that led to his defeat, but the hubris that had defined his entire career. He had always believed that he could outmaneuver, outfight, and outthink his enemies. But on that fateful day in June, his enemies were not just the Sioux and Cheyenne. They were the consequences of his own actions, the weight of his own decisions, and the undeniable truth that no man, no matter how bold or brave, can escape the hand of fate. As the dust settled on the plains of Montana, Tullock's Creek once again faded into obscurity, a forgotten stream in a forgotten valley. Yet, for those who study the events of the Little Big Horn, it remains a symbol of what might have been, a path not taken, a chance lost, and a decision that changed the course of American history forever.